Thank you for joining us today for the Generation Green Conference. My name is Shirley. I'm a grade 11 student at Oakville Trafalgar High School.
I'm Chansey, and I'm a grade 11 student at Iroquois Ridge High School.
My name is Rilla, and I'm a grade 9 student from White Oak Secondary School.
We are so excited to share with you this talk from Dr. Ellen Field. She joins us from her home in Toronto to speak to us today about climate education in Canada.
Dr. Ellen Field is currently an assistant professor working in the Faculty of Education at Lakehead University and has worked with multiple NGOs and research centers. She has studied both in Australia and Canada and has multiple degrees. Dr. Field is joining us today to discuss her research on climate change education and her perspectives on climate change education and schooling.
Hi, my name is Ellen Field, and I'm an assistant professor in the Faculty of Education at Lakehead University on the Orillia campus. And Lakehead Orillia is located on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe. And the Anishinaabe include the Ojibwa, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. And Lakehead University acknowledges the history that many nations hold in the areas around our campuses, and is committed to a relationship with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples based on the principles of mutual trust, respect, reciprocity, and collaboration in the spirit of reconciliation. Today, I'm going to share some survey findings with you from this research project that I did, Canada, Climate Change and Education. And as I go through these findings, think about your own experiences of climate change education in your classroom. What have you experienced so far? And that experience is something that's really, really important for you to talk about in terms of what, and also what you would hope to experience. And think about the ways that you may want to organize to improve your experiences in the education system with learning about climate change. So before I go into the survey, I'd first like to point out that Canada, as a signatory to the Paris Agreement, agreed to Article 12. And so in the Paris Agreement, there are 12 articles, I believe, and Article 12 is the last one, which calls on parties to enhance climate change education, training, public awareness, public participation, and public access to information, recognizing the importance of these steps with respect to enhancing actions under the Paris Agreement. So within climate policy, what we mostly see is that policymakers focus on energy, agriculture, and transportation, where in Canada so far, and in many other countries, policymakers have not yet fully engaged in the education sector as an effective focus for mitigation and adaptation strategies. So this is an area that we can think about how we can have better policy and also how we can start to advocate for the type of educational experiences that as parents we want young people to have, as students within the school system you want to have, as teachers teaching within the school system, as administrators who are working in the school system. We all need to be thinking about how we can improve our collective understanding of climate change, as well as our action taking. Okay, so I'll go into the research and I'll try to not bore you. So this research was conducted from 2018 to 2020, and it's a national survey of over 33,196 Canadians. It's a comprehensive mixed method survey, and it establishes baselines of Canadians. Actually, before I go into that, it was also done in collaboration with Learning for a Sustainable Future and was supported by SSHRC as well as Leger Research Intelligence. So it focuses, the survey develops baselines on Canadians' perceptions of climate change and its risks. It assesses Canadians' views on how the education system should respond, and it provides unprecedented data on climate change education classroom practices, both nationally and provincially, with regional reports available. So you are all in Ontario, and so there is an Ontario-focused report on the Learning for a Sustainable Future website. And in that, it gives you all of the provincial data. As well, there was a meeting last May with 75 educational leaders from across Ontario. And they were made aware of this survey and then workshopped to develop a climate action plan for addressing climate change education. And that is also available on the Learning for a Sustainable Future website. And this data is also important because we surveyed students from across Canada from grades 7 to 12, and we wanted to know their perspective on their experience of learning about climate change in schools. And so this is unprecedented and it hasn't been done before in Canada. So as I said, there was just under 3,200 respondents. It was delivered in both English and French. And the data was collected from just under 1,000 members of the general public, just under 500 parents, just over 500 students, and just over 1,000 teachers. So I'll go through some of the highlights, the key findings. So in line with other polling research, this survey showed that the majority of Canadians are concerned about climate change and that there are risks to people in Canada. There's also certainty among the Canadian public that climate change is happening. The survey, also in line with other polling research, shows that the majority of Canadians think that climate change is human caused. However, there are gaps in Canadians' knowledge and understanding, with only 48% of Canadians correctly attributing carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases as a primary cause of climate change. And in addition, 42% of Canadians identified that they were unsure how much heating the Earth system can tolerate. And these last two questions were 2 of 10 foundational climate science questions that were asked within the survey. And when we looked at the results of how Canadians did overall, we see that 43% of Canadians answered 4 or fewer of the knowledge questions correctly. So this shows that there are gaps and misconceptions in Canadians' knowledge. However, 51% of Canadians feel well informed, but only 14% answered 8 to 10 of the questions correctly. So there's an opportunity here for public education, as at 86% of Canadians agree that they need more information on climate change. And interestingly, when asked which sources of information Canadians trust the most, scientists and academics are the most trusted. However, Canadians get their information from television news, documentaries, and 47% said conversations with friends and family. And so just by talking about climate change, it can be a really powerful way for having dialogue and educating people about climate change. Also, I'll just highlight this because you're all young people, and this isn't on my slide. There's also research that shows that, and this is from the US, that young people, in particular, teenage girls, were more effective at shifting conservative fathers' views on climate change in the US, and they call this the pass-through effect of education. So shifting their fathers' political positioning on climate change due to the conversations that were happening in school. So interesting data. In terms of Canadians' perceptions of climate actions, there is, well, on the slide, Canadians are already seeing the impacts of climate change. 2/3 of Canadians claim that they're taking action to reduce climate change. There is doubt that technology will solve climate challenges without individuals having to make big changes. So this is really interesting because sometimes we think that technology will just fix everything. But according to this research, that's not true. As well, 79% of Canadians agree that while personal actions are important, systemic change is needed to address climate change. So this identifies a readiness in the Canadian public for strong climate policy. So let's look at formal education, because that's where it gets really interesting. So Canadians and educators agree that more should be done to educate young people about climate change. Specifically in the research, 65% of Canadians and the majority of educators. Students were about 67%, so a lot less. In addition, there's limited class time spent on climate change content in classrooms. So between 30 and approximately 60% of educators reported teaching any climate change content. You can take this moment to think on your own experience. Did your teachers, how much time did they spend on it? And for teachers who do integrate climate change, most students experience between 1 to 10 hours of instruction per year or semester. Was that your experience? Or did you have a teacher who went well and above and beyond that? So in our survey, it was also clear that teachers need support. So for some teachers, they may not teach climate change because they don't feel like they understand it. That can be a big barrier. They may also not teach it because they feel like it's controversial and that there'll be parental backlash. So teachers need support here. So instead of just blaming teachers, we need to sort of have a nuanced approach and think about what they actually need. So between 32 and 55% of teachers feel they have the knowledge and skills to teach climate change. So they need professional development, they need classroom resources, and they need curriculum policy to support them teaching more climate change education. Here in Ontario, we do have the grade 10 mandatory climate change unit that happens in Science 10. And there are other opportunities. And I know in geography, we have several expectations in grade 8 and grade 9. And then when you get to grade 11 or 12, you can take electives. But there's ways that this can be improved or that teachers could be better supported to have professional development in this area. Survey responses also showed that climate change is predominantly taught in science and social studies when it is integrated into classroom instruction. However, the majority of teachers believe that climate change is the role of all teachers. They just don't necessarily know how to teach in these other areas sometimes. So the survey also identified that students are a key group to target with climate change education and action. So 46% of students aged 12 to 18 when we ran the analysis to look at different attitudinal positionings, these youth were categorized as aware. And this aware categorization means that they understand that human-caused climate change is happening, but they do not believe that human efforts will be effective. So when I first saw that data, it kind of jumped off the page at me because I thought about what it means to understand that human-caused climate change is happening and to not think that anything that we do will change its outcome. And what that means to be a young person growing up right now, to be concerned about what your future is going to be, what the future quality of life will be. And that's really concerning also from a mental health standpoint. And so it also begs the question of how can our education systems help better prepare young people so that also they understand some of the solutions that are available to us and some of the ways that policy can be shifted to help mitigate us going into irreversible climate change. We will be living with climate altered futures going forward, but the degree to which we live, how much degradation there is still up for us to be responsive. And then also of note, Alberta and Saskatchewan frequently diverge from the rest of Canada in terms of a lot of the data. Okay, so in terms of ways that we can improve climate change education, on the left is something that I talk about in my talks, which is really about action on developing a strategy for action on climate empowerment, which will allow us from a policy perspective to see all of the different programs and the ways to improve them. I'm not going to go into it. However, we do think about moving forward, it needs to have justice centered in terms of the ways that we enact policy to make sure that those that are underserved are served in a just transition and that we don't exacerbate inequities that already exist. However, in terms of formal education, we highlight that we need leadership. Ministries of education need to release policy statements that set climate change education directives for each province. So how come the Ministry of Education has not yet declared a climate emergency? How come the Ministry of Education has not developed a policy statement that says this is what we need to move on as a province? Included is the need to revise curricula to embed mandatory climate change education expectations across subjects. Countries like New Zealand, Italy, the state of New Jersey, the state of Islamabad and Pakistan have all mandated core content around learning about climate change. Canada has a world-renowned education system. It's time that we did this too. As well, when students enter a faculty of education to get their teaching license, let's have the licensing bodies require that graduating teachers have a course in climate change education in their training program, so that when we have new teachers coming out who are newly licensed, that they're able to teach about climate change. And lastly, school boards need to provide professional development to enhance teacher knowledge, tools, and instructional strategies for teaching about climate change. Too often, a lot of the funding goes toward literacy and numeracy professional development, which is important, but so is climate change. And we really need to find ways that we prioritize how we're preparing young people. Okay, so I've talked for a long time. And I just wanted to sort of put these up in terms of some of the things that education needs to do. And I think these youth quotes summarize pretty well some of the required shifts that need to happen in education. So the first one on the left is from the national survey, and this student was asked, if you could tell your teacher what you'd like to learn about in terms of climate change, what would you tell them? And the student said, I'd like to learn about and do activities that reduce climate change instead of researching what it is. And so this is a really important message for teachers, is that we can't just learn about it, we have to do something. And actually, when we get active and we do things, that's going to help us reduce the stress that we're carrying around coming to know the urgency and the complexity of climate change. And the other speech is a Greta speech, which maybe you already know from the 2018 UN Climate Change Conference. And it also addresses the need for young people to not only experience coherence between knowledge and action, but also for young people to see adults tackling the climate emergency. So Greta said to a room full of leaders, why should I be studying for a future that soon will be no more, when no one is doing anything whatsoever to save that future? And what is the point of learning facts within the school system when the most important facts given by the finest science of that same school system clearly mean nothing to our politicians and our society? And I wholeheartedly agree. Young people need less dissonance and more coherence in their schooling and from society at large. So the last piece I would like to sort of introduce is what you can do. And sorry about that. And introduce to you the Climate Education Reform BC group. And this group recently launched their campaign, and they are a group from across British Columbia. And they're calling on the BC government, the BC Ministry of Education, to do some curriculum reform in response to the type of climate change education they would like to see. So I'll just play this video because they made this for me, and it's always better to hear it straight from them.
Hi, my name is Naomi. And my name is Hannah. We are coordinators with Climate Education Reform BC. We are calling in from the unceded, ancestral, and stolen lands of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, Tsawwassen, and Coast Salish Peoples land. We're acknowledging this because Indigenous folks have been leaders for bold climate action for generations far beyond our own organization, and as reflecting on past and present realities and emphasizing anti-oppression is an integral part of our organization. SURBC consists of secondary students from across so-called British Columbia who recognize the lack of attention climate change has in our school communities.
Our purpose is to advocate for an educational system that fully addresses the systemic and underlying causes of the climate crisis. In addition to the root of the crisis being clearly identified in school settings, we also desire for educational systems to highlight the interconnected and inseparable nature of climate justice and social justice.
Throughout the past 4 months, we have been establishing our team, creating networks, and engaging communities to discuss, share, and create a vision for climate education reform.
Now, we are excited to announce that we have just released our campaign name, Reform to Transform. This is our organizing team. Our campaign asks, or as we are calling them, our needs of the BC Ministry of Education include to teach through a climate lens, establish a community effort to review, revise, and implement a climate-focused curriculum, to provide teacher and staff training, and align school infrastructure with net zero GHG targets. We will be releasing our more in-depth needs with more specific anti-oppression and climate justice details in the next couple months.
In other words, our purpose is to hold the BC Ministry of Education accountable to adequately prepare students for the climate emergency to ensure that our future is led by informed and equipped communities. The needs that we've mentioned before aim to equip students with the skills and knowledge to face the climate emergency and to become future climate leaders.
We also recognize that education is a community concern, so we want to stay connected with you. You can sign up for our emailing list through our website, educationreformbc.ca, or stay updated through our social media and take actions in our upcoming toolkits.
Thank you all so much.
So I think their work speaks for itself, and maybe that's inspiring to you in terms of something that you can take action. For me, coming across this group and working with them and talking with them I think their work embodies transformative action taking, which is what we need not only in schools, but in all levels of society. And the last sort of piece that I'll share with you is, I mean, they're self-organizing and finding their way, and they are following this model from the UK called Teach the Future, and you can find Teach the Future online. It's a youth leadership approach to advocating for curriculum reform. And they argue that current climate education is inadequate, and the group in the UK has now expanded to Wales and I think Ireland and Scotland. And so this group in BC are being mentored by these youth in the UK, and they're developing their own strategies for working within the Canadian context. But this could be a way that you could think about mobilizing, and if it's something you're interested in, or if you feel that your educational experience needs to be improved. And I'll just say that in terms of, I look across Canada at climate change education, and there are some provinces that do better than others. And it also depends on the teacher that you get in grade 10. So as to what your experience will be. So not all experiences are uniform, and every province is very much different. So, you know, everyone's time is short, and as young people, you are balancing many things. So do the things that you're passionate about and help you find the ways to make the change in the world that you want to see. And with that, thanks for listening, and I hope this has been informative. And all of the reports that I was talking about, if you go to Learning for a Sustainable Future and then go to their policy link, you'll find all of the reports for Ontario that you might want to look at if this is something that you're interested in. Again, Miigwech, thank you for your time and have a good day.
Thank you for joining us today, and thank you, Dr. Field, for joining us as well. It was very inspiring and informative to hear you talk. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat or get in touch with us at hcc@haltonenvironet.ca. To learn more about Generation Green, join us tomorrow for the project launch, and stay tuned for more talks just like this and much more coming up in the spring.